Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Sunday Connections at the CAC. My name is Shawnee Turner. I'm the Interpretive Learning Director, and I am joined today by Michael, Vicki, Katie, Joe, and Rob. I'm going to let them give you their official titles. Michael, would you like to start?
Sure. My name is Michael Stillion. I'm an assistant teaching professor at Miami University.
My name is Vicki Daiello, and I am a professor of art education at University of Cincinnati.
Hi, I'm Katie Parker. I'm an associate professor at the University of Cincinnati and chair of the MFA program.
Hi, my name is Joe Civitello. I'm the installations director at the Contemporary Art Center.
And my name is Rob Robbins. I'm chair of the Department of Art at Miami University, and I'm a professor of painting there as well.
Great. Thank you all for joining us today. For our viewers, this is a nice group of people. I'm sure you're kind of like, wow, this is a lot of voices today, but it's also really important. I'm not sure how many of you know, but we annually hold an MFA exhibition. It started back in 2014, is that right, with UC? And then 2 years later, Miami joined. And unfortunately, because of our COVID-19 quarantine, we had to cancel that exhibition and it had to go digital. So we're here to talk about just that collaboration, the history of it, and how really this virus has changed our teaching expectations, the expectations for the students, and where we go from here. So I would just like any of you really to just jump in and talk about the history of this MFA CAC collaboration and your thoughts about its history.
Joe, did it start when the UC galleries downtown closed?
I believe so. Yeah, like I mentioned, I wasn't around for the first one. I wasn't on the like the full-time staff then, but yeah, I think that was about when it started up.
I think the UC galleries downtown closed, and then Joe Girondola, who was the former MFA director, then took all the walls and moved them to the CAC and built walls and used the first floor lobby, the black box, and then the lobby downstairs, and hosted the first MFA show.
And
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, before that even occurred, we had a relationship with the CAC already with the education. Was it called the Education Task Force back then, or the
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And now it's the Education Committee. But I remember having that conversation with people in the Education Committee about the exhibition, and all of a sudden it seemed like things started to move forward, and we were ending up exhibiting there. Who would have thought that it would have continued on for so many years? And that was 2014.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's evolved over the years. As you mentioned, originally it was in the lobby and black box space, and then a few years later it was up on the second floor, and then I believe last year and the year before that it was on the fourth and fifth floor. And it was slated to be on the second floor again this year, and that was just based on exhibition scheduling. But yeah, so it really came into something much larger than it was originally.
Yeah.
I know, I remember seeing probably one of those first one or two in the lobby with work sitting on easels on tables, and kind of all over the gallery, back by lockers, and pretty much anywhere students could find a place to set up their work.
And now we're driving around on the fourth floor with the skyjack hanging things from the ceiling.
It's pretty wonderful though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's great. And I think that this was also an impetus for one of our other programs. We have college response nights too at the CAC, where college students respond to CAC shows and are able to exhibit their work for a couple of weeks. So it really created this great foundation for college and CAC collaboration. Well, I'd like to show the students' work, so I'm going to share that screen, and we'll continue our conversation as we do that. Okay. So Joe, you created this great blog post on the CAC's website where you really talked about why the MFA exhibition was so important. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think since I've been in this position as the installations director, I feel like we just really look forward to this exhibition. So we put up anywhere from 6 to 8 exhibitions a year, and this is one that happens annually. And we just, as a team, really look forward to going to see the students work, and then once they start installation, just getting to work with them for a week and really, understand what they're trying to do and really trying to iron out how they want to install these works. I think it's a really good experience for them, and I really think that we, like I said, we look forward to it. So it's a lot of fun for us at the CAC.
Well, and for our students, and by the way, this is really the first year that we've had a large group of art education master's students exhibiting along with the Miami and UC MFA students. But for our students, this is really such an important event for them. They are already thinking about their culminating exhibition when they enter the program, although it's an abstract idea. But it, over those progression of the years, it becomes more and more real to them until it culminates in this experience where they get to work with the professionals, the CAC staff. And it's a really big deal. This is like a major transition for them from their school life into their professional, thinking of themselves as professionals out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Vicki's right. Every show they go to all year, they're scoping out that space and walking around and figuring out, where's my work going to go? So-and-so was here last year. Maybe I could go here, and then as things get built, they imagine it in that space.
Yes.
And really seeing their work in an amount of space that really most graduate programs aren't able to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm always impressed by the foresight that they put into it. I've really envisioned this piece in this area of the room, and they just really have it all thought out.
And I have to say, Joe, that they feel it elevates them and their thoughts about their practice by having the staff interact with them in such a professional way, being taken so seriously. I just never forget, after you visit and work with the students to talk about their initial ideas, there is this glow about them. They feel, I think, suddenly more empowered. They can see their work through the eyes of professionals, where they see it through the eyes of the professors and in critiques with their peers. And they've had some shows, small shows, before they get to the CAC. Usually student galleries, but this is a whole other level. This really takes it up a notch.
Vicki, you brought up something I wanted to touch on. Can you all really talk about the level of mentorship that happens between Miami, UC, and the CAC?
Sure. Well, it's an interesting relationship because the work that gets created that's ultimately shown in the CAC is not already figured out when the CAC staff and curators come to speak with the students. So there comes this, it's the beginning of a conversation that is ongoing between the curator, the professors, the students. And so Katie can speak to this too. We've sort of built it into a structure to manage and direct and guide those conversations without being top down. So it became very organic, but there's always lots of feedback. And we learn a lot in the process, as professors working with the curators. I know, Katie, if you'd like to speak with that. Katie and I partnered together, and it was really great.
I was thinking, it's over the course of about 2 months, because I think you all came January 20th. So it was almost exactly 2 months end to end, coming in, looking at the work. Then the students start to decide with the curators what they're going to show, figuring out how that works. And then us starting to send the students to different staff at the CAC. Mm-hmm. How would this work? Could I put a vinyl here? How tall is the ceiling? Where could this go? And then, Joe, what you're saying about the problem solving, I think a lot of the stuff that we do at school is really provisional, just to get a photo, to get it up, to see what something looks like. And at the CAC, it's really what are we going to build into the ceiling? How do we hang this work? What kind of grid structure can come down? Like you said in the blog post, what kind of hooks? Who's a special fabricator that does this because we like this and everyone else will like this? So I think it just sets up this professionalism in this way that they have to figure out from the beginning what their needs are, how to communicate those professionally to then get them solved, to then kind of move forward with each step, which I really like.
Yeah, I think the brevity of the show, the fact that it's at this significant venue that's going to have a greater audience than these students had probably ever experienced before, drives a whole bunch of things that need to start happening long before the show ever goes up. So without the CAC show, there isn't as much sort of significance put on the artist statement, the quality of the documentation of their artworks, the sort of overall sort of concept of their work as a body of work that's going to be exhibited in that particular venue. Everything becomes more significant because of the CAC show for them, in part because it also puts a hard deadline on everything. So for our students, I think it's a magnificent experience that really forces them to confront the real nature of their work. And know that their conclusions are going to be seen by a pretty broad audience.
Yeah, it's like 1,000 people come to the opening, right?
Yeah.
When what other time does an MFA opening have 1,000 people show up? And they have to know how to talk about their work with that wide range of people, which can be a challenge, but I think that's just a really good learning experience for them, and it gives them a leg up if they're planning on becoming like an exhibiting visual artist. This type of situation is really important. Working with the CAC, working with their faculty, I think gets them ready for the real art world, right?
Yeah, but it is, images, documentation, proposals. Rob, what you said about the writing, months and months of going back and forth on the wall text. Yeah, so all that is exactly what you need in any case to have any show outside of school.
And like you mentioned, when we visit you, we're a couple months out. So just seeing some of the work kind of evolve after that conversation. For example, like having a conversation with an artist, and they've always envisioned their work on the wall, but now we're presenting them with this wild space, and they never considered putting it on the ceiling or like installing it in some other way they wouldn't normally have.
Well, and working in the architecture of the CAC, the Zaha Hadid building, it can throw somebody for a loop pretty easily because there's no right angles in that building.
Right.
And some ceilings drop down a little bit lower, some ceilings shoot up like 35 feet, So again, I think it's a good experience for them to learn how to arrange their work on in such a dynamic space.
Yeah, and I think it's. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And just the scale of the space makes a big difference. So, they're producing works for 2, 3, if you add their undergraduate experience, 7 or 8 years, at a ceiling height, a typical ceiling height level. And, they learn quickly when preparing for the CAC show, which starts when they're visiting their colleagues' shows who are ahead of them years before. You can see that they're starting to have to sort of, imagine, sort of visualize how their work at its scale is going to work with the scale of that CAC space. And you can see that they start to think about how that's going to work within their confined limitations. So we'll see students then that are making work that doesn't cooperate with the scale of their studio, but is, sort of looking forward to the scale of the CAC space. And that's something they're going to have to do as artists, hopefully, for the rest of their life. And it's the first big opportunity they have in most cases to sort of project in that way.
I think as we're talking about the transition from the studio space to the space of the CAC, I think it's really important to mention the community aspect of this and the collaboration aspect that students are engaged in. The CAC pulls the curtain back so students can see behind the curtain and all of the intricacies that come together to create any show. And there is no substitute for that kind of experience of living that experience of collaborating with so many different people who all have different roles. And you become aware of the world of museums as this ecosystem that extends beyond the museum into the studio, into the public. Students who, especially this year, we had students who had some pieces that were interactive. And so you have to think about what the public's role is in activating that work, which up until those points, it's all pretty abstract because you're reading about it, you're watching videos. So in this case, they get this experience of the visceral nature of the exhilarations and the discomforts of anticipating having your work out in the public and having other people help you do that. It's a really humbling experience, I think.
That's one of the things I've always really appreciated about this collaboration, because when I was teaching, I felt like we weren't quite doing enough to prepare students post-college in terms of what it's like to really put your work out there and work with galleries and different professionals. And this experience really gives those students that.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the aspect that really hurt the most when we could not exhibit this year, when we were just days away from installing, when everything shut down.
So
this year we were going to have the both universities on this like intermingling. So that was going to be, I was excited to see how the students would work with one another, and those are the more connections that they would make. This year the show was going to be a little bit more curated, where pieces were going to be placed, next to each other based on theme or image. And you're right, that next step is missing this year. Yeah. So how else has the quarantine and your situation with teaching changed how you've prepared this year's MFA exhibitions and MAAE exhibitions?
I'd say the hardest thing is that a lot of the work was these really large scale installations that were going to be hung in ways the students had never done before. We're going to utilize space in a way they hadn't. And so that they don't have those images to support the work. And that in fact, a lot of the work was never seen. Right. And they kind of had collections of things that were all ready to go, like 2 days out to hang. So I think that's the hardest thing. So in that slide roll you showed, some students have installed their work in empty warehouses. Some live out on a farm and have installed it on kind of barn walls, or like post it with their mom in the kitchen. So I think they're coming up with clever ways, but I think that's like the biggest hit, is not having those professional images to add to their packet kind of moving forward.
Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
With Miami, we're going to have a fall show in our Easton galleries. So it's going to be a group show with all three of our grad students in one space, but they'll at least get to see something up on the wall and hopefully get some good images from those, from that exhibition.
Yeah, it's worth recognizing, though, that you sort of a culminating exhibition like this for these students is the significant culminating exhibition experience for their degree. If I think back to my MFA, I don't recall a whole lot about the commencement ceremony. What I recall quite vividly is my thesis exhibition with my colleagues. And so I think it's interesting that this is a group that, that their whole sort of the perception of their degree has been changed by not being able to participate in this exhibition. And I think our fall exhibition is going to help, but there's going to be this gap of several months. And we're still not sure how we're going to be able to manage if social distancing is still a requirement, and all those sorts of things. I will say it's interesting because I think these students are certainly better prepared and more acclimated to the idea of participating virtually in the sort of artistic dialogue than, say, I and my generation happened to be. They grew up basically with Instagram and emailing and sharing images digitally, and then the physical exhibition was sort of a bonus. So I do have to ask myself often, what's the difference between my perception of the loss with this exhibition and their perception of the loss with this exhibition?
I actually have it. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no,
Vicki.
no, you go ahead, Shawnee.
I was going to read Taylor's statement. Should I do that? Would you like to make your comment first?
Sure, maybe, yeah. So maybe this would contextualize her statement. I would say that even though there is a loss of this significant event for students, I have to say many students are thinking about their community. I'm thinking about how the written thesis documents that many of the students created have like an afterword or a reflective component to them, where students have reflected on what this means, the COVID pandemic, for their work, and how this loss has maybe put a finer point on some of the ideas that they've had about their work. And I think that's what you will hear in Taylor's words when you read her response. But I think it's given students an opportunity to think about the role of the artist in the world, and the role, in the case of the program at UC, the role of art education in this world. What does this all mean when we're fearing for our people in our community, fearing for their lives? And we're having very different conversations now, I think, that are woven into the art making process.
Vicki, I'd like to return to that question after I read this, if you don't mind, and let everyone have a chance to respond. So I'm going to read an excerpt from Taylor Satterthwaite's thesis paper, and she is a UC student. So here it is, quote, "That show, that opening at the Contemporary Art Center, was going to be a proving ground for my work. Obviously, this did not happen. After the long solitary hours in my studio making the garments, I wanted that breath of air and opportunity to see how they actually worked. Instead, I went straight to the solitary practice of writing. The relational aspect was mostly denied, and that feels wrong for a project specifically inquiring about relationships. On the other hand, there was some irony to be found in the way that the situation has proved my concepts. I've been wearing the blue linen dress nearly every day of quarantine, and the knitted cocoon has been all but stolen by my partner as he works from home. My dressing gown is perfect for a day when you are not sure whether it will be nice enough for a walk outside. I made garments for uncertainty, and everything is uncertain right now. Perhaps the next step for me will be looking at the clothing people wore in quarantine. What could we learn from the way we combine novelty pajama pants with professional tops, or how apparel companies change their marketing? What do our choices reveal about our personal relationships with clothing when there is no one else to see it? Which garments truly helped us tread the unknown? Or maybe our COVID era making practices are worth looking at. In the past 6 weeks, I've finished a yarn spinning project, knitted a shawl from it, spun some more, baked focaccia, made sauerkraut. I could go on, and it is only not for me, nor is it only people who usually spend making things. It could be the extra time at home, or the desire to have control over what is in your home, or the way making things relieve stress. The point is that I think the motivations and desires of makers now are probably somewhat unique, yet could provide insight into making during normal times. It is time to notice what else we are neglecting and dive deep in those unfamiliar waters." Mm-hmm. So I know when you sent that to me and I read it, there were some moments in there that really touched me in terms of things I've been reflecting on, in terms of trying to find things I've been neglecting, refind things I've been neglecting. Not just make for making's sake, but make because I feel like I need to find another part of myself that, the hectic pace of everyday life has, in some ways beat out of me in a way. And you're laughing because I'm sure you've probably all thought that. But, I felt that, her comments were so mature. And I know she's an adult. I know she's a master's student, but there's a wonderful amount of reflection and maturity in the questions that she's asking, and the same ones that you brought up before we went into that statement. So I'm just wondering how you're all feeling about this, and in other student responses that you would like to talk about.
Yeah, I so far just in meeting, continuing with school for, I think maybe 5 weeks after the show was canceled. We still had more school. So as we meet with students alone and you see them in their apartments and you see them working, I think they've started to problem solve in a way that they would have never, ever been forced to do. When you're working in your studio, you run to the art supply store down the street. Everything's very easy. Things are across the street at school. So I think that's what I'm amazed with, and what I think is going to be the nice thing that comes out of this is artists knowing that they can get through it, they can work, they can solve these problems without all the things they're used to, without all the kind of comforts of studio, of school, of access.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the people that I've talked to, my students, the grad students, it took them a couple weeks to find their footing, but I see them leaning towards like working a little bit more digitally, and altering their images on their iPads or in Photoshop to sort of find a ground to start to build from within their studio practices, because some of them had to move, like they had their studios, and then some of them had to move home, and then all of a sudden they're in their childhood bedroom, right, and trying to make these paintings happen again. And I think that they're going to be innovators. They're going to figure out solutions. They're going to kind of roll with these punches. I think that it's a good generation to figure it out. Like Rob said, the people that are a little bit older, the artists a little bit older, are going to have a harder time sort of tackling this situation, where these younger artists are going to be like way more involved with technology.
Mm-hmm. And Shawnee, to continue along this point of thinking about education, you'd sent a question to us earlier about educational standards, if it's important to maintain high educational standards. And that really struck me, because I was thinking this situation is causing a lot of people to question what we've taken as norms. What are the normal high education standards? Why are they considered the high standards? And what could we be doing better? And I think this situation has exposed the inequities across the world in ways that we have not been able to see or been reluctant to see before. And the fact that, many people can't even get materials to work with, or can't even connect to the internet. So as I think about your question about high education standards, we absolutely have to maintain the highest education standards, but also at the same time, really test ourselves, question ourselves about what is most important to teach now, what is most important to make and to talk about.
Yeah, when all of this started, the education department, we put together all of these art bags of just materials that could be distributed through CPS schools as students were picking up their lunches at these different sites, because we know, in art education, we know, already that our educational field is not fair. It's just not. And, I'm privileged enough to have my children in a school district where every student gets a device. Mm-hmm. That is not the case. That's not the norm. That's not even the norm. So, they were able to continue their education, but, my husband is a teacher, and, for instance, he was picking up iPads and delivering them to students, and because their parents had to be at work, they couldn't show up during that 1 hour. They were allowed to pick one up, even if they were even granted one, so it's, finding ways that we can teach in a situation where there are students who aren't able to learn online, and not just across economic and technical backgrounds and things like that, but abilities. And there's so much to consider that I think, that hasn't been discussed outwardly.
Well, I think artists are really good at taking us into those conversations that we might not have otherwise. Right. So that gives me a lot of hope that I want to see us be really careful to watch that the arts aren't marginalized in this time when people are trying to figure out what's essential and what isn't. The arts are more important than ever.
Yes. I know a large trend within, not that it hasn't existed before, within the arts is social activism. Can you talk about how you feel like that may come up with your students or in the future because of this? Maybe.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not sure yet, because I think what Vicki was saying, some of the students who had these interactive projects that involved the public, those were the ones that kind of, they lost even more than the images. They lost the actual experience of seeing what was going to happen. With the audiences coming in, moving their work around, solving the problems they had set up, playing the games that they had built, interacting with the digital works that the art education students had built. So I think that's kind of the trickier thing is, and I've talked to these students, just one-on-one online about how do they start to solve this in the future, and how do they think about art education, and how do they think about museum spaces, and what could they do that's adjacent to a show that takes place outside, maybe on the sidewalk, that gets spaced out, where things get passed and you keep what you're given. But like Sebra Debrecht, her piece was about recycling and people coming in to sort and kind of figure out the nuances of the Cincinnati curbside recycling program. So she ended up, like Michael said, turning it all digital and making an online digital sort that then people all over could get the QR code, go on and do it. And then she was given data that then she can put back into the project and figure out later. But I'm not sure what it means for like groups kind of getting together and really doing something as a larger force just yet.
No, I think that long pause before we jumped into answer, I think, is equal to, how daunting this is, that I don't think old solutions have worked so well in solving inequities. It doesn't mean we, can't keep doing the important things that we've been doing, but this, there's a lot to consider. I think people now are thinking about their practice and about education in ways that they could never have imagined before. And so it does give one pause, but it also too gives us, I think, the motivation to really get to work, that we will figure this out. And I think we will figure it out together.
Yeah, certainly in terms of teaching art, because we have both undergraduate and graduate programs at Miami, I have to think that the Department of Art, which spends a lot of time every day sort of with instructors working very closely with students through physical processes, handling clay or welding or mixing paint and actually putting it on there. The art departments saw more challenges than a lot of other programs, and because of that, I think the transition from face-to-face teaching to virtual teaching, greater challenge, but also has provoked larger sort of almost existential questions about what teaching art is. So a lot of the instructors, the professors in the program, have had to look at their typical learning outcomes. What do I want to get out of a ceramics 1 class or a sculpture 1 class, and then say, how can I shift some of these learning expectations and learning outcomes to an online format? So where there was a lot of conversation about the quality of the physical act, how well is the bowl thrown? There are now conversations about sort of how does the bowl that's being thrown sort of fit into a broader culture? And those conversations start earlier on. What is the questions of content, of interpretation, of culture and community are working into the conversation earlier than they would have. We see those discussions happening in the Ceramics 1 class with early projects. I have to think that the fallout from this is going to be that a lot of teaching of these sort of very traditional arts will be changed forever. You know, I think people are going to realize that students engage with the conversation in different ways when the content of the conversation changes. And some of those will be good, and they'll get held on, they'll get preserved and advanced, and some we'll see instructors very, very grateful to return back to being able to show them with a physical wheel how something needs to be done. But we're definitely going to see a long, the teaching of art has fundamentally changed at this point, and it won't be the way it was ever again, I don't think.
And I had mentioned the MFA show is the time that I personally get exposed to all these like up and coming artists coming into the Cincinnati art world and then going out into the broader art world. And I think we're going to see, I don't know if excited is the wrong word, but I think you're going to see these few generations that are involved in this, how they pop up in the art world and how they have gone through this and how they bring these experiences into the Cincinnati art world for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think they're going to become a lot more, like you're saying, like flexible with their practice. Like artists who use clay are going to like turn around and start sewing and knitting and, you know, drawing. And all of a sudden, while ceramics is important, there's another way to get that idea across. So I think it's kind of nice to see how practices can expand with what's happening. And there's a lot of artists I see working outside or weaving with 2 trees on their property. So just being creative with what you have right now. So then when you go back, you do have maybe more of a focus or more of an appreciation or slow down and think, does this always have to be X or Y? You know, could it be this?
Right. I think that's a really good point. And in my experience in teaching and being on different portfolio reviews and in crit situations, I felt like a lot of students had a hard time really explaining their concept. It was more they wanted to talk about their process. Mm-hmm. And they had a difficulty kind of pinning down exactly what they were going for in terms of meaning. And I think you're right. There's going to be more of a focus on idea and content and then how to get there.
Yeah.
Which I think is really kind of wonderful because it's all in there. It's just sometimes not a skill that they quite have early on. Well, really that was a lot of what I wanted to talk about. You all were wonderful at kind of anticipating my questions even before they happened, because it was a very fluid conversation, really talking about the impact it had on students and where we go from here in terms of teaching. And I think that there's a lot of ambiguity still, but I share your belief in that, honestly, the students are going to keep up. You know, they will probably figure it out before we do. and we can learn from them. So thank you all so much for joining me today and talking about this. I wish all of your students luck, and I wish you luck as you navigate teaching over the next few semesters. And Joe, you luck installing shows.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Oh, I do have one question, and we have a little bit of time if you guys don't care to take it. Let me pull this over here so everyone can see it. So, have students had a hard time dealing with isolation and education at home?
Yes. I think especially the grad students, a lot of them who've moved to Cincinnati from other places, live alone, you know, they had this amazing community in their studios, and every day they'd show up and they'd be surrounded, whether they wanted to or not, you know, with 20 to 30 other people. And I think being alone, isolated at home is really hard. And I know they've formed groups where they get together online and hang out and talk about their work, but they do struggle because when there's no one around, it's really hard because our studios at UC are open. There's no doors. So it's just this constant, like, what are you making? You know, for better or worse. But I think after 2 months of not having anyone kind of just popping in, sitting down, drinking a coffee, you really have to push yourself to keep going and know that no matter what, this all is going to end and it's towards like a greater good.
That's a really good point, Katie. I'm glad you brought that up about the community of the open studios, because that reminded me of something that one of the students said to me at the conclusion of her thesis. She wanted to know if she was really finished. So is this it? Am I done? So without other people around you to kind of confirm and be a part of the rituals of closure, celebration of closure, all that comes with an exhibition, embodied experiences of exhibitions or education, it has been really hard for students to feel like they're done or the meaning of being done with their education because there was no tangible experience of that.
Like normally we'd have the thesis defense at the CAC.
Right.
We'd all sit around. We'd ask them to leave the room. Tense. We'd talk about them and be like, you pass. And we'd hug them. And now it's like, can you turn down the volume and walk away from your computer so we can talk about you? Then they come back. But, it's just not the same, like kind of those rituals that really do make it feel like, yeah, great. Like this is good and I'm going to keep going.
And adding to that is that our grad students now are entering a job market in an economy that is completely different from what they had planned on, from what they were expecting. And it's probably never going to be the same again. So, arts institutions are going to be shutting down or changing their format. Galleries, are certainly going to be going out of business in a lot of cases. And I think artists are going to be developing new ways, as we see on Instagram and everywhere else, of sort of finding ways to generate revenue and to have an effect with their art. But studying art and earning an MFA doesn't come with a lot of certainty ever. But now we've got a group of students who are graduating into more uncertain times than ever. And so that's going to contribute to this sort of sense of an absence of closure as well.
Yeah.
So yes is the answer.
like many of us, right?
Yeah. Right. I think we're all, you wake up and you're like, ooh, here it goes. Yeah. And, some days feel like really positive. Like this feels so nice. And, I just think we're all kind of on that like up and down or you just kind of go to your studio and you're like, I know this is important, but maybe right now, is this what I should be doing today? But just continuing to like keep going.
Yeah. I've been having lots of conversations with people on Zoom and like on Google Hangout, people I usually don't have conversations with all of the time. Right. So like I'm connecting more with people this way than I usually would in any other time. Like I'm really good at avoiding people. But the challenges now need to be, we need to meet up, we need to talk about these things and try to figure out how we respond to them. And these groups are popping up all over the place where these conversations are happening. So we're trying to, it's hard to answer the question in some of these questions because we just don't know. It's still really early. But we are working on it. We are like trying to figure this out, and we will. Just when will that happen? We're not sure. It's not going to be like I don't think it'll be a smooth transition. Right.
Oh, great. Thank you all again for sharing today and being so honest and vulnerable. That was really nice to hear. I know it's hard to do that though, isn't it? To be vulnerable and talk about not knowing things and figuring things out along the way. So for all of you viewers out there, we are going to take a break next Sunday for Memorial Day. So try to enjoy your families, although you're probably sick of them by now. And we'll see you again on May 31st with Senior Curator Amara Antila. And she'll be talking with the artist, Tanya Candiani, and others about our next show, hopefully opening in June. We'll see. Thank you all, and be safe and healthy.
Thanks, Shawnee.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.